Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. So, when you hear the term human resources, what immediately pops into your head? Probably things like benefits administration, payroll, maybe enforcing company policies, right? Well, actually, modern HR professionals are so much more than that. You are essentially organizational investigators. You're the detectives of the workplace. You use data to crack the case of workplace effectiveness, uncovering exactly what makes your organization tick, and honestly, what might be holding it back.
Let's be real for a second. How do you currently prove what works and what doesn't in your organization? If someone from leadership asks you if that expensive new training initiative actually worked, do you just point to a gut feeling, or do you have the hard evidence to back it up? Today, we're going to dive into the absolute necessity of solid HR metrics, because it's not just about measuring things, it's about measuring the right things so you can definitively prove how HR contributes to the overall success of the company.
To do that, we need a roadmap. We'll be looking at the power of data, the logic of research, and how to gather your evidence. After that, we'll walk through the experimental process, decode some quantitative data, and finally, look at the qualitative focus. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the power of data and why we actually need to investigate.
Measurement isn't just some passive box-checking exercise. Organizations use these systems to actively track performance and continuously improve their strategic planning. As an HR professional, you literally have to define what success looks like, and then go out and measure it. When you use solid metrics, you're sending a really powerful signal to your employees. You're showing them that the organization is deeply committed to specific goals and values. It's all about taking your HR programs, analyzing the data behind them, and turning that into a massive strategic advantage.
Moving right along to Section 2, the logic of research. This is where we learn to think like a true detective.
Okay, so when you're forming a theory in HR, you've basically got two main ways to approach it: inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Think of inductive reasoning as starting small. You make specific, on-the-ground observations and build your way up to a general rule or conclusion. Deductive reasoning does the exact opposite. You start with a known, universal theory and then apply it downward to a highly specific situation. What's actually fascinating here is that organizational procedures are generally built using inductive reasoning, while company policies rely heavily on deductive reasoning. Together, they give us the how and the why of our workplace rules.
Let's look at a couple of micro-mysteries to really ground this concept. For an inductive example, let's say you observe that a group of your absolute best new hires all happen to speak multiple languages. From those specific observations, you induce a general rule: language ability might predict job success. See? Specific to general. Now, for a deductive example, organizational research universally shows that highly controlling managers reduce employee morale. You observe a specific manager in your company who is, well, extremely controlling. You deduce that their specific department will likely have low morale. That is general down to specific.
All right, Section 3, gathering your evidence and finding the facts.
When you're gathering evidence, you basically have two main avenues. Primary research is the data you roll up your sleeves and collect directly yourself. It's highly specific, it's current, and it's totally customized to your exact organizational needs. Secondary research, on the other hand, relies on data that's already been collected by somebody else. Now, secondary research is significantly faster and way less expensive, but the catch is that it might not perfectly match your unique work environment.
So what's actually in your HR detective kit? Well, for primary methods, you're running internal surveys, conducting one-on-one interviews, facilitating focus groups, running experiments, and doing direct observations. For secondary sources, you're looking at things like historical HR records, industry benchmark reports, or even purchase data. And honestly, a truly great investigation usually combines both. For instance, if you want to see how a new piece of software affects manager productivity, you might read external industry journals, which is secondary, but then also run internal focus groups, which is primary, to get the complete picture.
That brings us to Section 4, the experimental process. You can think of this as your official sting operation. To keep your investigation totally objective, you want to rely on the scientific method. It breaks down into 5 straightforward steps. First, problem analysis, which is just clearly defining the issue. Second, hypothesis formulation, where you create a testable prediction. Third is your experimental design, where you control variables and set up groups to compare. Fourth is data collection, gathering the actual facts over time. And finally, step 5 is data analysis, where you interpret those results to make concrete, bulletproof conclusions.
Let's bring this to life with a real-world scenario. Here's our micro-mystery. Sales are inexplicably decreasing across all our retail locations. Step 1, done. Step 2,
Our hypothesis: stores that receive specialized sales training will increase their sales more than stores that don't get the training. Step 3, the design. We take two very similar groups of stores. Group 1 gets the specialized training, Group 2 does not. Step 4, we wait a year and measure the sales data. In Step 5, the analysis. If Group 1 shows significantly better sales numbers, boom, our sting operation worked, and we've successfully proven the financial value of that HR training initiative.
Moving into Section 5, decoding quantitative data, or dealing with the hard numbers.
So quantitative analysis is practically the bedrock of important HR tasks like compensation analysis, employee surveys, and cost-benefit studies. It uses clear numbers and measurable data to condense massive, sometimes overwhelming amounts of information into something we can quickly understand and actually act upon. A really practical way to organize all this group data is by using frequency tables. Take a look at this straightforward HR example right here. Instead of staring at a chaotic spreadsheet with 67 individual employee salaries, this simple table instantly reveals a crystal clear pattern. We can see right away that the vast majority of our employees fall into that $40,000 to $50,000 salary range. It perfectly organizes the clues for us.
We also lean heavily on descriptive statistics to visualize our data. Things like pie charts and donut charts are incredibly effective for researchers. Why? Because they let you instantly see the distribution of different groups as percentages of a whole dataset. It gives you immediate visual comprehension without having to do any math in your head.
Now, another thing we have to identify is central tendency, which is basically finding the exact center of our data. Look at this visual of a positively skewed distribution. This happens when most of your data values cluster at the lower end of the scale. You can see how the mode, which is simply the most frequent value, sits right at the very peak. The median represents the exact middle value of our ordered data. And the mean, which is your average, actually gets pulled further out to the right by that long tail. Understanding how these three measures interact is absolutely crucial so you don't accidentally misinterpret your own evidence.
But hey, just finding the average isn't enough, right? We also need to understand the variation. And that is exactly where standard deviation comes in. It measures how closely your data clusters around that average. Now, why does variation matter? Well, think about it. If you have a small standard deviation, your data is tightly clustered, which means your results are highly consistent. But if you have a large standard deviation, your data is all over the place, indicating major inconsistency. It essentially shows us the spread and the reliability of the evidence we've gathered. Next up, we use measures of association to figure out how different variables relate to each other. Correlation measures the strength and direction of a relationship, running on a scale from a perfect positive +1 to a perfect negative -1. Regression analysis takes that a step further by actually letting you predict one variable based on another. A classic HR example for this, identifying the exact relationship between an employee's education level and their salary, so you can accurately predict future compensation needs.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. I literally do not have the time or budget to survey all 10,000 employees at my company. And the good news? You don't have to. That is the magic of inferential statistics. Assuming you have a normal bell-shaped distribution, you can just pull a small, random, and truly representative sample and use that smaller group to make highly accurate conclusions about your entire organizational population. It is a huge time saver. And finally, we arrive at Section 6, the qualitative focus. This is all about uncovering the motive. So, quantitative data gives us the undeniable hard facts, sure, but it definitely has its limits. It tells you the what, but it doesn't always tell you the why. Qualitative analysis uses open-ended research methods to dive deep into human behavior. It explores the opinions, the motivations, the core values, and the perceptions of your workforce. It really is the ultimate tool for solving the human mystery of why people actually do what they do inside your company. To be a truly unstoppable HR detective, you need both the hard facts and the human insights to build out your complete toolkit. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Armed with these highly reliable research tools we've explored today, everything from experimental design to inferential statistics, what organizational mystery are you going to solve next? Get out there, start gathering your data, and crack the case. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.